Welcome to the Secret Keepers podcast with your host, Kareen Zutleger. Join us as we uncover the hidden thoughts, stories, and moments that help bring light to the healing power of truth and examine how silence can affect us mentally, physically, and spiritually. We'll also share profound stories, interviews, and transformative narratives to help release ourselves from the hidden and step into healing towards inner peace, joy, and fulfillment. Now, here's your healing strategist and host, Kareen.
Welcome to the Secret Keepers podcast. And today I have the most magnificent Jess Haessly as my guest, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Yes, I am the magnificent Jess. Uh, no, it's interesting because I think we don't allow ourselves to say that about ourselves, right? There's a underconfidence that is often um, played off as being humble, and humility is super important, and that is something that I've learned and am still learning. But it's also equally as important to be confident. So,
Yes.
oh gosh, about me.
Yes. What do you do, Jess?
So, uh, I am a, I am learning. I am a disruptor. I,
We need those.
yeah, yeah. Let's see. So I grew up in a household of two parents, my mom and dad, and a big part of my identity, although it's not my all of my identity, is my dad is Black, my mom is white. And so already I am a in between, or a sort of bridge between these two different cultures, if you want to call it, if you want to call it that way, these two different races, that kind of thing. Both of my parents met in the Marine Corps, so both very strong, very independent, very stubborn, very passionate, very opinionated. And both of my parents operate to this day with very little filter. And so this is the kind of space that I grew up in. Um, Also very emotional. So when my dad, so my mom left the Marine Corps after she had me. So, while she was pregnant with me. And so she wasn't in super long, but my dad stayed in up and through the 90s, or through like the mid 90s. And so he was um, deployed to, there was a couple of occasions when I was younger where my dad was not around for a long period of time. One when I was just going into kindergarten. He was in Okinawa, Japan, and and that was in the early 90s. And at that time, my mom and my two younger sisters had stayed with my grandma in here in Wisconsin, in Menasha, Wisconsin, where my grandparents lived. So we stayed with them, and then eventually we ended up moving to Arizona. So, okay, I'm trying to like find the through line, which is very difficult. So
But it,
I'm born in North Carolina, near a military base in 1983.
okay.
Um, During my mom's pregnancy, obviously she leaves the military, leaves the Marine Corps honorably discharged, and and again my dad stays in. So twice in my life, and I think this is probably going to be relevant somewhere along the line. So born in North Carolina, didn't know much about it. Born in, or had lived for a time in Alabama, and this is where we lived in a trailer. I was very young, too young to remember that space either. Um,
Mm.
and then the place that I remember as a child the best is living in Yuma, Arizona. So we lived in Yuma, Arizona for a number of years while my dad was still in the Marine Corps. And it was there. Um, so before we moved there, let me go back. Before we moved there, um, in the early 90s, my dad was in Okinawa. We're living in Wisconsin. Moved to Arizona. My dad came back. I don't know exactly how all that all
Yeah.
transpired. Um, uh, and then the second time that he was gone for a year to Saudi Arabia. That was during the Gulf War. And what I remember, and this is, I think, plays highly into my own mental health and that of my sisters, and I think there's a generational thing here. What I most remember about that period of time, that year, was my mom was super, super depressed.
Okay. Sure.
And one of the things that I remember, or that in retrospect, I recall growing up, is as the oldest, being the person who felt that I had to manage other people's emotions.
Okay. So emotional caretaker you were.
And in doing so,
Mhm.
right, I set my own, I played off my own emotions, however I felt about things, like didn't matter as much as how other people felt. So my mom is super depressed. She actually have a video recording where, because they always recorded, my dad was an avid, uh, like he probably had one of those big on the shoulder video cameras. Like,
Sure. Yep.
he
Oh,
loved taking video. He loved taking pictures. And even to this day, his now wife uh, finds it very disturbing that my sisters and I can be like in a heated discussion, and then as soon as a camera gets in our face, we're like all smiles. And it
mm,
is kind of disturbing in a way. Um, so so my mom is depressed. She's listening to Sinead O'Connor, I swear, probably the whole year. Sinead O'Connor,
yeah.
nothing compares to you. And I'm just like,
Already. Okay.
we
Yeah.
have this video of her where she had just, she had taken video of us opening our gifts during Christmas because he wasn't there for Christmas. And
Mm,
it was materialistically one of our biggest Christmases that
okay.
probably contributed a great deal to their debt. Um,
Oh,
the
okay.
uh, the un unfortunate thing about military families is uh, that they're notoriously people in service are notoriously, I would argue, underpaid. So,
Okay.
right, like you're serving your country, you're
Mm,
giving up all of your rights, and we were on food stamps, you
mm,
know. Um, now, and they used credit cards for a lot of things. So anyway, so we have this massive Christmas with more toys than than we knew what to do with. And there is like I said, a video recording. My mom is just like, you could tell how sad she is when you're watching this recording.
sure.
Um, we let's see, let me skip ahead to where I am today, if I can do that quickly.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Mhm.
so that period of time happens when my dad gets back and is also eventually honorably discharged from the Marine Corps. Um, I think his last position was as a sergeant, I want to say. Um, so held a pretty decent leadership role. Uh, he decides to start his own business in um, personal fitness training. And this is where I kind of, as a yoga instructor, right, have pulled a lot of my, I've pulled probably a lot of my personality and places of interest from my dad. Because right or wrong, I had often seen my dad as the stronger person. And I myself felt that I needed to be and wanted to be the stronger person. So
Okay.
when it comes to secrecy, probably a lot of my secrecy or a lot of the secrets kept revolve around uh, not wanting to or feeling that if I were to express certain things, that that would be a burden to others, and that I have had to, um, that I'm somehow superhuman and have to bear the burden of other people's emotions for them.
Okay.
Which brings me to, uh, in a strange way, where I kind of am today. So my dad gets back. He starts to build this business. He doesn't charge nearly enough. Meanwhile, at the time, my mom is babysitting 24/7. So my mom's babysitting 24/7. My dad's going into debt, starting his personal fitness business, and on the side, working late nights as a bouncer at a dance club, nightclub. And eventually, they come to a point where they're like, we need to do something different. Um, I don't know all the ins and outs of the financials. I do know that there is a lot of debt.
Sure.
And so but we never felt that. They rented a house. We lived in this pretty suburbanish neighborhood. Um, we always had something good to eat. We always had clothes on our back. We never felt. It wasn't until later that that we realized, oh, that we were actually pretty poor. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
So parents try
yeah,
to they try to shelter, right? Parents try to shelter
yeah.
from those burdens, right? Because we don't necessarily have the ability at that time, right? The prefrontal frontal cortex isn't developed. We don't necessarily,
Mhm.
right? That logic and reasoning isn't there to understand. So parents do the best they can with the information they have to try to protect their kids. And we,
And they were so young by today's standards, right? So my mom had me, and it's funny because she, I was born, yeah, she would have still been 19 at the time. And so she was actually asked to, and married, 19, having a baby. And she did this interview. Somebody in the community, I think it must have been somewhere in North Carolina, wanted to do an interview on how she is handling teenage pregnancy. Right? So, right,
oh,
like just the
yeah,
very different time.
sure. Well, and it just sets up
Time.
like a whole, like, you kind of understand. So, like, your mom is pregnant with you,
Hmm.
right? And she is facing a lot of judgment, even though she is married, right? She's in this military career. Your dad is in this military career, and she's facing judgment. And she can feel it, right? So she can feel that she's pregnant with you, therefore you can feel it.
And I would say that actually my parents, being a mixed race couple, probably for sure, especially when they lived in Alabama, dealt with a lot more uh, racism and racial tension,
Yeah.
because this was in the 80s. Um, they
Sure.
probably dealt with that a lot more than the being young
Being,
and
being
pregnant.
right.
Um,
A lot going into that. And tell me
yeah,
this, like, okay, so like I'm getting a general feel for, what there was a lot happening there, and your mom
yes.
was carrying a burden and your dad was carrying a burden, and then that kind of spilled over into you being that emotional caretaker. And then ultimately, because now I know, like I know you because I know you teach yoga classes.
Hmm.
We met, through a mutual friend, so through holistic healing is how I met you. And so, I know you have taken this stuff of your life, these situations, and you have used them to develop, not just for other people, but for yourself first and foremost, right? Because physician heal thyself. You have developed some programming. So tell everybody a little bit about what it is
Yes.
you do yourself.
Yes. So, um, in 2016, I took my first yoga teacher training. And as soon as I completed that training, I wanted to learn more because I don't like to just regurgitate information that I've learned. I want to understand it fully.
Mhm.
Why are we why are we doing headstand and do we need to, right? So, and the answer is we don't really need to do headstands.
Especially after they, it's like, what is it, 28 or something? They're like, no, your spine fuses, and that's just a no.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of contraindications for some yoga poses. People that have certain heart conditions, a downward facing dog or anything that where your head is below your heart is not going to be good for you.
Right.
Um, so I did a lot of self-education and significantly slowed down both the way that I practice yoga and the asana, so like the positions, because yoga is very broad and there's a lot of different uh, uh, aspects to it. Um, so when I'm speaking about it, I'm speaking mostly about the physical practice of the poses, the things that we're most familiar with in the West. And then also significantly slowed down the way that I teach and focused and continue to focus on keeping bodies safe, um, and emphasizing people listening to their bodies. Now, in some classes, I have noticed that people will say, listen to your body, but then they'll still guide a really, really, in my opinion, they'll guide the class still too quickly. And um, it's a natural thing that we have as humans. We want to be successful. And so you can tell people all you want, slow down, take your time, do what you need to do, but most of the time people are going to follow how the teacher is guiding. So one of the things that I learned in my teacher training was when you're guiding a class, um, breathe as though you are moving in the class. So if I'm guiding sun salutations, I'm not going to move it like inhale mountain, exhale forward fold, inhale half. I'm going to say inhale mountain and I'm going to inhale. I'm going to say
Yes.
exhale forward fold and I'm going to exhale. That gives me space as well as my students space to move and breathe at a safer pace, both
Mhm.
for their bodies and for their minds. Um, so 2019 to 2020, I went through a second teacher training. So in yoga, there's a 200-hour teacher training, And then there's 500. And 500 means that you have added an additional 300 hours of training on top of that 200. So that's how that works. I had also taken some other, did some webinars in there, some that were free, and other different types of yoga trainings as well. The 500-hour one was really good because it also it got a little bit deeper into one anatomy, but also deeper into a little bit with life coaching and self-inquiry work, so that deeper inner work. And it was in 2022, 2021-ish, 2022, when I was watching just way too many, and I say this a million times, and I'm almost getting sick of hearing myself say it, but for the sake of this being the first time on this podcast and for your audience, I watched way too many cult documentaries.
Oh,
A
okay.
ton of cult documentaries,
Okay. That's
and
interesting.
and trying to figure out, well, what is it? And learning from, because there's experts in those fields that talk about, sense of belonging, people that don't, really know who they are, and so they're looking for their identity, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and I wanted to find out, okay, how can we shore up our minds in such a way that we embrace critical thinking to a degree that we don't get manipulated into cult or cult-like, into actual cult organizations or even cult-like organizations. So this is
Okay.
the impetus, or this is the impetus for my empowered mindset workshops. And
Okay.
I'm watching these documentaries. I'm wondering how do so many people get taken in?
Mhm.
Um, my husband, who went to school for communication and the arts, so like marketing, um, is not a marketer. He's not doing that for a living. And part of the reason for that is he's very skeptical about uh, the manipulative tactics that are sometimes used in marketing, right? Like,
So,
and even more so now, you see a lot of commercials that appeal to emotions, and
right.
um, and that works. So I'm looking into brain sciences. I'm doing my own kind of research. I'm looking out there and like, okay, who knows something about this, and what can I learn about what different habits or tools help increase our ability to make better decisions.
Yeah.
Um,
Healthy brain, right?
yes, yeah.
A healthy brain to make good decisions.
Exactly, exactly. So I come across Andrew Huberman, and now I've recently learned some things about the way that he operates than that are less altruistic than I originally thought.
Okay.
However, that's where I started. That's the information that I started with, is looking at the first few episodes that he had put out there into the world about, optimizing your mind, optimizing your work, just really optimizing, I guess, your human potential
Right.
through different habits and protocols.
It's important to be discerning, right? When we're out there,
Yes. Yeah.
like seeking information and like we're looking to gain knowledge. And I mean, there are a plethora
So
of
much.
opinions right out there. And so
Yeah.
you really need to be discerning. And if it feels crunchy to you, it probably is crunchy, right? It's like,
Yeah.
maybe
Um, yeah.
skepticism is a good trait to have in there, Jess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so. Not everybody would agree, but yeah, so I wanted to, I did make sure that, okay, I'm listening to this person talk about these different things, talk about things like getting sunlight, talk about things like walking and how the eyes, that movement back and forth of the eyes happens naturally when we're out on a walk. This is the reason why a lot of people say, hey, if you're mad or if you need to clear your mind or gain clarity rather, go for a walk. Um,
Yeah.
there is a there are things that happen in the body that essentially calm the nervous system when we're walking, and one of those things is occipital flow, I want to say. I forget exactly what it is. But basically, it's like, and it's a therapeutic modality as well, that a lot of therapists will use is, holding an object in front of your eyes. And I've had this done by a therapist, holding something in front of your eyes as you're recalling maybe a traumatic experience, and that back and forth movement of the eyes. Um, Somehow I forget all of the mechanisms included in that, but it helps to bring a sense of calm to the nervous system. So activating our parasympathetic nervous system versus the sympathetic, which is the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Um,
Yeah. I
so
find that relatable.
yeah, so I dug into some of the research behind a number of different things, um, including mindfulness. And there are I believe, over 1,200 different research papers, not all perfect research, but there's a lot of research in that suggests um, that speaks to the benefits of mindfulness for things like stress management, uh, emotional regulation, things like that.
Well,
Um,
they've been in the East for thousands of years, right? I mean, it's
well, right, yeah. So right now, what we're seeing is, I think, probably science starting to catch up to what's already been done because it's science. And I think that's important to note when we're looking at maybe holistic things that don't necessarily have the science behind it. And this gets a little bit shaky, but when we're looking at things that don't necessarily have the science behind it, one, we can say, well, I'm just going to write that off because there's no science. Or we can say, well, I'm going to try it out for myself. I'm not necessarily going to preach it out there to everybody else, but I'll try it out for myself and see how it works. And then recognize that it takes time to do that research. It takes several years to do really good research on different things. Even yoga, one of the events that I try to, or that I've gone to are these virtual neuroscience of yoga events. And they speak
okay.
to the science behind yoga, but they even bring up the fact that a lot of the research into the asana practice, that is, again, the physical movement practice of yoga, doesn't account for everything. So when they're doing these studies, they're noticing, okay, some people are having benefits, but are those benefits really due to the particular poses that they're moving through, or is it because you're connecting with a group of people? Because most of these studies are done with groups of people in a classroom, right? And so I think it's very, very important to, again, like you said, be discerning especially if we don't have a lot of background. Like I don't have a lot of background in how to read research, um,
Mm.
but what I try to do is look at a number of different studies and look for, okay, what are they telling me the benefits are, and where are where does more research need to be done? Because a good study is going to show you both of those things.
But I think you
Yeah.
hit on a really pivotal point too, is that like you take the information in, you try it out on you. In
Yep.
experience truly is one of our best teachers, right? So you can take this information in. I can have knowledge in air quotes, I can have knowledge.
Hmm.
Ultimately taking that knowledge in and applying it and having experience is where the wisdom is gained, right? We
Right.
get to um to do that, and you were able to take, you took a look at your life, and you were able to look at your childhood. You could see some things, they were like, they showed up, and you're like, oh, you start to recognize these things help
Hmm.
create certain feelings within your body, and then, right, pass from mom and, into you guys. And with that, then what you just took your natural curiosity and was like, I want something different for myself.
Hmm.
I'd like to bring something different for my yoga students. And so therefore I'm going to investigate this a little further and create something that is going to help, evolve people from experiencing certain mental health things,
Hmm.
bring that into my yoga practice, and then also help people so that when they are out there looking, um, they don't end up in a cult somewhere, because that's
Right.
possible. That's one possibility out of many
Hmm.
possibilities
Yeah.
that can happen. So you've taken all this information, and you've kind of, brought it in, and you developed a course
Hmm.
for empowered mindset that you bring with not only just with yoga teaching, but this empowered mindset course that people are able to take. Um, and this,
Yes.
for the sake of time here, um, please just tell everybody, like, your biggest nugget of wisdom that you have gained on this journey of becoming a yoga teacher, really looking at the mental health components of your own life, and how can you bring, better teaching into for your students. um, just give us like the nugget, the nugget
Mm. So I think it's still in development, just like the empowered mindset.
okay.
Um,
Okay.
we, let me see, let me think how to one, what to share, because yeah, there's so much. So I think one of the things that I bring to whenever I speak about empowered mindset, or whenever I facilitate a workshop, is that these are potential guidelines. They're
Mm,
tools um, for you to try out, uh, but you might have your own.
yeah.
So I'll talk about mindfulness and gratitude and the importance of those things for increasing our dopamine and serotonin. I'll talk about rest a as part of resilience,
Mhm.
and the importance of really just bottom line autonomy. And so, man, okay. So we have all these different tools, we have all these different habits, but last year I came up with, or because of experiences from last year and a little bit earlier this year, um, I expanded on empowered mindset
Okay.
into 7 pillars.
Okay.
And the very first one is the most important one.
Okay.
And that is, and it seems simple, but it's knowing your intrinsic value and worth.
Mm-hmm.
Before
Absolutely.
we can do anything for ourselves that puts us into a healthier position, either in our work, in our life, in our relationships, um, before we can start, because there's 7, so before we can start building boundaries, before we can start um, noticing what our values are and aligning our actions with, before we can feel like we have a voice, have access to knowledge and trust our intuition, before we can do any of those things, we have to know that we're actually worthy of those things.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So that would probably, I guess, be the nugget. And then also the humility part
Mm,
is knowing that I'm on the same journey. So I want to share these things out there to help people, but I'm also practicing them. I have not by any means, and don't expect to master any of these things. There's so much wrong with me. Right?
no, no.
And I
Okay.
say that in a
Stop
way.
right there. There's a lot of rage.
I know, I know.
Yeah, we
And
go into that. And I think it's females, right? We want to, like, we go into this like self-deprecating because when I'm like talking about, like how awesome you are or how magnificent you are, right? Own it. Like that's the
mhm,
biggest part that I've learned from my mentor Joseph is to celebrate yourself, whether it is
yeah,
a fraction of a step forward, a step forward,
mhm,
a step forward, right? And so
yeah,
we get to acknowledge ourselves for those things. And I'm going to tell you that I have seen you taking the steps forward, right? And so
mhm,
as a witness, right, as a witness of you, I get to celebrate you and seeing that because that's important.
yeah,
And so what I would like the audience to know is that Jess is an amazing yoga teacher. She puts on great workshops, and please tell them how they can find
yes,
you.
yeah. So you can find me on my website at yogastorynow.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn or my Yoga Story Facebook page. And then I'm also on Instagram.
Awesome. I will have all of that information in the show notes for you so that you can connect with Jess and you can experience her very calming nature and experience her workshops if that's what you need. You want to bring them into your workspaces because that's what she does with them. She brings
Mhm.
her workshops into um, workspaces and into educational environments. And she
Yes,
has a
in
passion for
person
that.
and virtually. Yes.
Yes, and Jess is an amazing human being. And thank you so much for sharing with us today, for sharing the journey to like, mental wellness, mental health challenges. If someone is really struggling, I always suggest that they seek professional advice. Going to see their healthcare providers. These are my experiences, your experiences, and the things
Mhm.
that we've learned along the way. But however, with that, knowing that you and I both have experienced our own journeys on mental health issues, we do have experience in
Mhm.
and so we're speaking to those experiences and the things that you and I have learned along the way. So thank you for being here today
Yeah, thanks so much.
on the Secret Keepers podcast. And like I said, to connect with Jess, all that'll be in the show notes.
Thank you for joining the Secret Keepers podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please give us a like and follow so we can invite you back. And if you just want more, visit CorrineZuleger.com. Remember, you're not alone.